Hi, guys.
Hey, Alan.
Hi. Hi, Alan. Okay, we're discussing the Mets tonight?
Yeah, we're comfortably zoned, and it is Peter Golenbock, remembering Dynasty, remembering bums, in this case, remembering Amazins, and we have three Meshuggahs, one of them who isn't me tonight. Mark Weiss is replacing me. My voice is Gonzo. So take it over, guys. Have a great show. Enjoy. Peter, I told you off air, I didn't even know the book existed. I'm on the West Coast. It got no publicity out here. It was written about the Mets. I was following the Mets for 40 years. Long distance. Learned so much. I devour the book on a daily basis. So enjoy it and enjoy the show, guys. Enjoy each other's company. And take it, Alan Blumkin.
Okay. Peter, let's start. How did you get involved with doing this book?
Well, I write these books for a living. And so having done Dynasty, which was a history of the Yankees, and then done Bums, which was a history of the Brooklyn Dodgers, I really knew that the joy of doing books like that is the interviewing process, the opportunity to pick between 50 and 60 players from one of the teams and to interview them, 10, 20 years after they retired. And so I did that with the Chicago Cubs. I did a book called Wrigleyville. I did it with the St. Louis Cards and the St. Louis Browns, a book called The Spirit of St. Louis. And I wanted to do a book about the Mets. I was always a big Mets fan. I was appreciative of how they started. Casey Stengel was the first manager. George Weiss was the first general manager. And so I was able to make a proposal that a major publisher gave me money to spend a year interviewing players to write a book on the New York Mets.
Peter, it's Mark. How you doing?
Hi, Mark.
I got a question for you. How did you pick the players that you were going to interview? Because with any team's history, there's always some key players who are going to give you the best stories, and then there are some guys who are going to give you the dirt, and other guys who are going to give you the party line. How did you pick the guys that you interviewed, and how did you figure after you did that which ones made the best stories for the book?
I mean, that's part of what you do as a writer. First of all, you pick players who will answer the phone and say hello. That's the first thing that you do. What's wonderful about this business is you have no idea who's going to be a terrific interview and who's going to be not a terrific interview. But if you let them know that you're serious about what you're doing, and so very often, not very often, all the time what I would do before I called somebody or went to see somebody is I would do the research so that I would know my first, say, 10 questions would be very personal questions to let these players know that I wasn't just some, moron who was, out for a joyride, that I was actually doing something very serious, that this was something very important to me. And if I made them feel it was important to me, almost always they will give you, their full cooperation. It was very, very rare, and I've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of players. It's very, very rare that a player won't give you their undivided attention and, give you their all. I mean, almost all of them do it. Obviously, if you do find somebody who's like that, you hope that there is some kernel of something interesting that they've said, and if there is, you put it into the book. Obviously, if it's not interesting at all, you leave it by the wayside. I mean, you just don't know when you go to interview somebody whether they're going to be interesting or not. You have no idea.
Now, who would you say surprised you the most and gave you the most entertaining and the most informative interviews? And would you say anybody kind of let you down, like you expected a lot more from, and maybe you just didn't get enough from them, or they just, weren't forthright or just cooperative?
Well, I was always sort of disappointed by Tom Seaver. I was always fascinated by him. He lived in Greenwich, Connecticut. I grew up in Stamford, Connecticut. So Tom Seaver was always somebody I was very much interested in. But for whatever reason, Tom was always reluctant to write about himself in any sort of serious way. To this day, I don't really think that Tom has written an autobiography, quite frankly. On the positive side, there were so many players, Mets players who were just, so terrific. Probably the one who stands out more than anybody else is probably Ron Swoboda. Swoboda, I'll bet we must have talked for 5 or 6 hours. I mean, he just loved being a Major League ball player. He loved being a Met. And he loved the notion that somebody cared enough to call him up and ask all these very specific questions about his career. And so we talked, and we talked, and we talked, and we talked. Only a portion of it, of course, went into the book. I wasn't writing Ron Swoboda's autobiography. I was writing a history of the Mets. It's an oral history. Let me make that clear. The histories that I wrote about these teams, I wanted to do oral histories because I always felt that the most important people on any team were the ball players. And so I wanted these books to have, say, 85 to 90% of the information that comes directly from the baseball players.
Well, I have to say that when you bring up Ron Swoboda, I'm kind of biased about Ron. I actually met him at the Hall of Fame. I went up this summer for induction weekend for Mike Piazza, and he was sitting at a table.
Yeah?
Did you go?
I went 3 years ago. I had done a book with Doug Harvey, the umpire, and Doug had invited me as his special guest to the Hall of Fame. And so my wife and I, we went up there, and of course we had to stay in a little motel 50 miles out of town.
So did we. It changed. I think it was Johnstown or something.
Oh, who the hell knows where it was? I mean, we were driving.
I drove to a million farms to get there. Okay.
Oh God, driving up and down mountains. It was just ridiculous. And then
dirt roads.
At night it was foggy, and I thought we were going to die. But
you sure we weren't in the same car?
I went there for about 10 years, the weekend after induction. And the point, we stayed in Cooperstown, and the places that for the induction weekend, it's like Louisville for the first weekend, and May for the Kentucky Derby. They're booked up for years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I know it. So at any rate, we went up there, and unfortunately, poor Doug Harvey was too sick to go.
Oh.
But I got to see Rusty Staub. I had spent the 1985 season doing a book with Davy Johnson, which is called Bats, and I got to spend the 85 season.
The host has joined the conference.
Aha. At any rate, so I got to know the players who were playing with the Mets in 85, and Rusty Staub was one of them. Sid Fernandez was another. Gary Carter was another. Those were my three buddies as I spent the season with the Mets. And Rusty was at Cooperstown, and I got to talk to Brooks Robinson and all sorts of wonderful people who were there. I mean, the baseball people, as far as I'm concerned, are just, some of the greatest people who ever lived. I
couldn't agree more.
I have no idea where this conversation started, but somehow we ended up in Cooperstown talking about great ball players.
I think it started where I was telling you that I was up in Cooperstown for the induction ceremony this year for Mike Piazza, and we wandered by a table, and sitting there was Art Shamsky, who was selling his book about the 1969-70 season and all the championship teams that had won in New York during that time frame. But sitting next to him was Ed Kranepool, Cleon Jones, and Ron Swoboda.
Oh, fabulous.
Art was a good conversation. Nice guy, good conversation. Obviously, he was there for his book, which I totally understand. So we talked a little bit about it. Eddie was a little standoffish, I guess.
Yeah, Eddie would not interview with me.
And that's insane if you think about it, because he's the first 17 years of the franchise.
I know. I called him at his. He was a stockbroker, so I called him at his Merrill Lynch or wherever he worked, and I called him, and he just would not return my phone calls. And so you can only interview people who will allow you to interview them. And unfortunately, Eddie wasn't one of them.
That is correct. And like I said, he didn't really chat much. He was a little standoffish, which is kind of weird for a guy who was sitting up there trying to sell autographs and stuff like that. Cleon Jones didn't really talk a heck of a lot. As a matter of fact, that's how we got into the conversation with Ron Swoboda, because he started telling us about things that Cleon did. He was almost like talking for him, and then he started giving us the whole history of what led up to the 69 Mets and the 69 Mets, and then he started talking about some guys in the minor leagues that he'd been scouting that he thinks are going to be wonderful ball players for a bunch of different teams. And the next thing you know, I look at my phone and I realize I've been talking to him for about 20 minutes. And it was almost like we had to leave. He didn't want to let us go because we had such a great conversation. I think he kind of enjoyed the fact that we really knew the history. And I think, to your point, being prepared for a conversation is good.
Yeah.
But we talked about the catch that he made, and he was like, I've got a lot of mileage out of that thing.
He certainly did.
I interviewed Dick Roth 31 years ago, and I started by reciting names of the 52 Pirates who we came up with. And
there you go.
He said he hadn't heard some of those names in 30 years.
Who were the two brothers? Remember the Pirates had a couple of O'Brien brothers. Yeah. There was a baseball card.
They were the
O'Brien brothers.
Basketball. Yeah.
Yes. And one of the Heisman Trophy winners. He was a Pittsburgh Pirate.
They had.
Yes.
The football player.
Yes,
he also played for the Redskins for 2 years, and then he was seriously hurt in an automobile accident after 1955, and that ended both his careers.
Oh, wow. Wow. No, I know it. No, Swoboda was a wonderful, but there are all sorts of wonderful people who I interviewed in that book.
Art Shamsky gave aid and comfort to a friend of mine named Ross Adele, who became fairly close to him because we had Art at a couple of our local Sabre meetings. In fact, we had one in a restaurant he used to own in downtown New York. And my friend Ross passed away 10 years ago from esophageal cancer, and Art would call him up almost on a daily basis when he was going through it toward the end.
Yeah, I was thinking of going to Israel and doing a book on there's a baseball league in Israel.
Yeah.
And Art Shamsky was one of the 4 managers in that league. Unfortunately,
I think Kenny Holtzman was too, right?
I think Holtzman had a team, and Art Shamsky had a team, and Ron Bloomberg had a team, and I can't remember who the 4th manager was.
Holtzman and Shamsky came out of the same area in St. Louis, suburb of St. Louis.
Yeah, but that was a league, that Israeli baseball league never got beyond that first season, I don't think. I think it folded. But it would have been fun. It would have been interesting to go over there and see that.
Especially getting in on the first year, as any league that starts up always has trials, tribulations, and some great characters.
Sure, always. I mean, my forever boys about the senior league.
I just learned that.
The most wonderful experiences. One of the most wonderful experiences.
The other day. I never read it. I just ordered it 2 days ago.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you'll get a kick out of all the people you meet in that book. Major leaguers are just terrific people.
They really do have the greatest stories, and back to that.
But they have the only stories. They have the only stories. If you want to know what happened, you got to ask the baseball players. You can't ask the reporters. You've got to ask the people who actually were there.
Well, I think the funniest thing is as Swoboda's giving us the stories and telling us everything that happened, Cleon Jones is sitting there nodding his head yes for everything that was true, shaking his hand backward and forward if it was kind of on the bubble, and then smiling with this wry smile and shaking his head for no if it was not true. It was like the storyteller and the jury.
That's wonderful. The other thing you discover when you interview a lot of ball players is that some people are just shy. They're just not confident. They don't want to be interviewed. They don't like having to be on the stage, and so they don't talk to you.
I mean, it's human nature, and I totally get that. But when you think in the context of them doing their daily work in front of upwards of 50,000 people every day and on television where millions of people are watching, it's hard to grasp that they would have that shyness, but it totally makes sense. I mean, Roger Maris was a shy guy, and
he
performed in front of thousands.
That's very, very true. No, I mean, you can think of the people who, just were not comfortable being interviewed.
Yeah,
a lot of guys got a very, very bad rap because they refused to answer questions from the reporters. They just weren't happy doing it. They're not many of them, but the ones who were that way got this reputation of being sort of nasty. And of course, some of them were, but some of them weren't nasty. Some of them were just very shy.
And then you've got the other guys who are the major extroverts, like a Gary Carter, and sometimes that didn't play well with their teammates.
Well, you brought up a very good name.
One of my favorites, by the way.
I love that guy. I mean, I love the guy like a brother, Gary Carter. He was playing in a golf tournament down Naples, Florida at the time when I called him. He said, "Yeah, come down and we can talk." And I did. And we must have sat for a couple of hours. And he answered every one of my questions. It's all in Amazin there. He answered all of my questions. He was very forthright and honest. He was just as friendly as possible. He was just, these are people you want to be friendly with forever. Gary Carter was one of them. He was wonderful. And yes, he understood that some of the players, they called him Camera Carter.
Gary Camera.
Yeah. Gary Camera Carter. Especially in Montreal. There were a number of the African-American players who did not particularly like to talk to the media. And so when they saw that the person who they flocked to after every game was always Gary. Because Gary was happy to talk to people. Gary just, is part of the business, part of the game. And he was a happy guy. He was more than willing to talk to anybody who wanted to talk to him.
Well, Gary did another thing too.
Yeah.
I was going to say, Gary did another thing too, which was really special. And Rusty did the same thing when they both played up in Montreal. They actually learned a lot. They learned to speak in the language. They learned French. And the fans really embraced them because of it.
Sure. Well, Rusty, as I said, I spent the 85 season with the Mets, and Rusty was one of those people. We'd go to the movies in the afternoon because the games, of course, were at night. And he was, lovely guy. He was a lovely guy. Gary was a lovely guy. Sid Fernandez was another guy. Some players really do keep their nose clean, even on the road. It was interesting to watch.
You get to talk
this was a team with Keith Hernandez and.
You got to talk to Keith Hernandez much?
Sure. He was having a very difficult time of it because he had just gotten divorced and he was not happy. But I came to admire how he played the game. He was a marvelous first baseman.
Yeah, well,
and a terrific
Carter ran that 86 team on the field.
Absolutely. And one of my great disappointments, of course, is when you sign a book in January or February to write a book about a season, you have no idea whether, in fact, they're going to win the pennant or, come in last. Yeah. You just don't have any idea. So I signed this book to do this book with Davey Johnson for the 85 season, and we had a real shot. We had a real shot to win the pennant.
I remember that.
And the last 3 or 4 games, we were in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
St. Louis and Pittsburgh. Those were the 2 final places where we played. And we just couldn't do it. I think we lost by 2 games.
That was the year they won 98 and came in 3 games behind the Cardinals.
It probably cost Davey and me, probably cost each of us about $100,000 each by not winning the pennant that year, because that would have been a hell of a story had they won. And then, of course, as you know, they won it in '86.
I don't want to bring up your buddy Len Dykstra.
Yeah, my boy. Dykstra was a young kid on that '85 team. I knew Dykstra.
He was like a midseason call up. I think Mookie had gotten hurt and they brought him up.
That's exactly what happened. Mookie got hurt and they brought him up, and he was marvelous. He was a character, but I tell you what, that guy could play. He really could play. Unfortunately, he's a psychopath and something of a con man, which is a shame.
Well, he's back at it now on Facebook. He's posting about some second chance loan place that you should go to, and if you can't get loans. And I'm like, oh, Lenny.
Oh, Lenny. Well, he stole my money from me, which it's just a terrible thing to have somebody do.
Well, it's not like you're the only person that he's done that.
No. Listen, I knew that was a possibility when I went into it, but we had such a good time doing this book for the 6 or 7 months we were working together. It was like we were brothers. It was very funny, and then of course his addictions, came to the fore. And he decided he needed money desperately, and the place he was going to get the money from was from me, which was a shame. It was just a shame. And the book became a bestseller, as you know. It was my 10th bestseller. So it wasn't a total loss, but of course he got all the money. Yeah.
Well, Nails was the worst sports book I've ever read in my life.
Well,
I didn't get halfway through it.
It could have been better. It could have been better had he allowed me to put the final, edits on it, but he never gave me that opportunity.
I'm talking about the one that he did with Marty Noble, right?
Oh, when he was a freshman, when he was a rookie?
Yeah.
Now.
That book was...
Alan, I got halfway through it and I put that one down.
Yeah, I call it the Plan 9 from Outer Space baseball book.
Oh, that's funny.
That was like the worst ever, yeah.
Yeah, he did it with a sports reporter from Marty Noble from
Tuesday.
My first newspaper job was with the Bergen Record, so I sort of knew Marty. He was a nice enough fella. He was a nice guy. That's all I have to say.
We had to interview any of the front office people.
For the most fabulous interview.
Yeah.
The most fabulous interview for Amazin was with George Weiss's wife.
Hazel?
Really?
Hazel, yeah. It was terrific. It's in there. It was really terrific. Yeah. Yep.
Well, he was the first GM.
He certainly was. And a brilliant man. A brilliant man.
I think the Mets of 1962 were the victims of the Angels of 1961, because that expansion team did so much better than anyone expected that the second batch of expansion teams, the players that were available to them were, how do I say this by being kind? They
gave the Mets and the Houston players the dregs. They gave them the dregs
of society.
And I suspect, you'd never know this for sure, but I suspect the difference was in the National League you had Walter O'Malley running things. And so Walter O'Malley, who was a cheap SOB, Walter was not about to give anybody anything of value. And I suspect strongly that Walter O'Malley was behind the notion, let's give them garbage. And that's pretty much what they did.
The story about Walter O'Malley is when they made the trip to Japan after the '56 World Series, and some longtime friend of his wanted to go. O'Malley said no, and they asked O'Malley why. He said, "Do you know what it cost to ship a body back from Japan?"
Exactly. Well, O'Malley had been the protege of the president of one of the banks in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And because of that guy, O'Malley became possible for him to make a lot of money and to ultimately become a partner in the Dodgers. And at a certain point, there was a question about, I think it was inviting this fella to the World Series or something like that, and O'Malley said no. And the fella asked him, he says, this is the guy who made it possible for your success. How can you deny him this? And basically, O'Malley, who was this cold-hearted guy, said, there are times you just have to break these things off. And of course, he did the exact same thing for the people in Brooklyn when he took his team.
Yeah, he did take care of Campanella.
No, he took care of Campanella. That's true.
Drinking problem.
Yeah, he did. I mean, but he could be a cold-hearted guy.
The thing about O'Malley is that if you ask a Brooklyn Dodger fan, they'll have one opinion of him. You ask somebody from L.A. about him, and they'll have a different one because obviously
I would hope so.
One was the beneficiary of the team moving, and the other one was the loser because the team left. But that's just weird how that always comes into play. And my guess is that O'Malley did everything based on the dollar sign. There was no sentimentality for that guy.
Oh, that's true. I mean, it's interesting. There's an argument that somehow he wanted to build a dome stadium over
I've heard it.
Atlantic Avenue, and that Robert Moses, who was somehow in charge of all of this, decided he wanted
the chief architect
to play in Queens.
Robert Moses was the de facto mayor under Wagner.
Right. Right, and so there is some thought that O'Malley was sort of backed into a corner, but you got to realize
Peter,
too. Wait, let me just finish. That O'Malley was talking about leaving Brooklyn in 1951.
Right.
So if he's talking about leaving Brooklyn in 1951, I think more than anything else, he's using this Robert Moses thing as an excuse.
But that's what a lot of people felt, that he asked for a piece of property that he knew he was never going to get because Moses was Mr. Highways and cars and building grand projects, and the last thing he wanted to do was have somebody build a stadium on Atlantic Avenue in Flatbush in Brooklyn where all the traffic and congestion was, and people would have to take subways and Long Island Railroad. He wanted that grand municipal stadium to be the centerpiece of the World's Fair in Flushing Meadows, and that's what he wanted. And O'Malley knew that he wasn't going to get what he wanted, and he asked for what he couldn't get, and that gave him the public relations move to go toward L.A. or anyone else who was going to be the highest bidder.
Without a doubt, I agree with you. I agree with you 110%. And of course,
Bill Wrigley traded the rights to Los Angeles for the rights to Fort Worth, Texas.
That's right. That's right, because Wrigley knew that when the Dodgers moved to Los Angeles, and at the same time that the San Francisco Giants moved to San Francisco, that would be a wonderful thing for his Chicago Cubs. And it was.
Yeah, because the Giants were scheduled to move to Minneapolis. That's what
right.
The original stadium there was built for.
That's exactly
well, that's because they had their farm team was in Minneapolis, the Millers, right?
It was. I had, for my book Bums, I had this wonderful conversation with Horace Stoneham, who was still alive at the time and lived in Phoenix. And I called him up on the phone, and he actually picked up the phone, which I thought was marvelous. And I asked him about it, and he said, yeah, I had every intention of going to Minnesota. And then when O'Malley called me and said, hey, I'm going to Los Angeles, why don't you go to San Francisco? He thought to himself, yeah, that makes a certain amount of sense. Why don't we do that? And so they did.
They took him out to Candlestick Point when it wasn't windy.
That's right.
About 1 o'clock in the afternoon when it's sunny.
Yeah.
That's right. They took him during a time, I think it was the morning. They took him in the morning when there was no wind.
Right, the morning, yeah.
I've worked there.
You worked there?
I worked out in Pleasanton, California, which is a suburb of San Francisco, and I took the BART into the city, and it was about 100 degrees in Pleasanton at the time.
Right.
So I'm dressed in shorts and a T-shirt, figuring the same thing in San Francisco. Little to my knowledge, but I find out real quick that when the fog and the wind comes in off the bay at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the temperature drops into the 40s.
That's right.
I got fooled like Horace Stoneham.
Sure. I went to a game at Candlestick Park, too, in July. And holy smokes, was it cold. I couldn't believe it.
We had the Sabre convention out there in 1998, and the game was a night game between the Giants and the Texas Rangers at Candlestick, and it was 60-something degrees and 30-mile-an-hour winds. I said, I'm not going. I said, I got enough wind at Shea Stadium.
60 degrees? Alan, 60 degrees? You had a heat wave.
Yeah, I gave the ticket to somebody, and when they all came back, they said I made the right decision.
Right. Right. Who was it who got blown off the mound?
Stu Miller.
Yeah.
Stu Miller.
Stu Miller in the 64 All-Star game?
One All-Star game.
Yeah.
There.
Got blown off the mound at Candlestick Park.
I used to refer to Shea as Candlestick East because the winds used to come whipping through there pretty good.
Yeah, it is.
I as a kid going to Met games, we would always say, "What's the temperature out?" "Oh, it's 70 degrees out. It'll be 50 and windy inside Shea, so we have to dress for the winter."
Yeah. Yeah, I went to a lot of the early Mets games in '62 and '63 and '64. I loved going there and watching them play. They were a lot of fun. I was a huge fan of Casey Stengel. I just thought the world of that guy, and so the ability to see him again to me was wonderful.
I think you have to say that Casey gave the franchise legitimacy by being the guy in charge of that team for the first 4 years.
Oh, no question about it. There's no, really. I mean, they stuck the Mets. They really stuck the Mets good. One of the fun interviews was with Rod Keneal. And what I hadn't realized, of course, is that Rod Keneal had come up in the Yankee organization. And so when Casey Stengel was going to the very first spring training for the New York Mets, he invited Rod Keneal to come because Keneal had been to his Yankee spring trainings and knew Casey Stengel's theories of how to do things. And so really he was bringing Keneal not just as a second baseman, but also sort of as, in a way, an assistant coach, which I thought was really interesting.
And then George Weiss put in all the ex-Chargers.
Well, I mean, you need to draw fans, and so who do you bring? You bring as many former Dodgers and Giants as you can possibly bring.
They brought Dodgers. The only New York Giant besides Mays that ever played for the Mets was Eddie Brissou.
Right.
I told Eddie Brissou this. He was at the San Francisco conference in 1998, Sabre meeting, and I told him that, and he said, "I didn't know that. Thank you." He was very surprised.
Well, Brissou was in my Mets book. Yeah, he was in my Mets book. He was also in my Red Sox book.
The Dodgers had plenty of ex-Dodgers. Yeah. In fact, Steyer and Hodges were teammates there for the first month and a half of 1963 before Hodges went to Washington to manage.
Right.
And the Mets had Roger Craig and Charlie Neal.
Sure.
I think Clem Labine was there, too, in the beginning, right?
Yeah,
Clem was there. Al Moran played shortstop. I think Al hit about 190 for the season.
Don Zimmer?
Don Zimmer was the very, very, very first third baseman on the Mets.
Yeah, he went
over
30-something. They shipped him to the Reds for a horrible player named Cliff Cook.
Cliff Cook.
Yeah.
He was there for 6. Don was there for 6.
They at least were interesting.
Well, you had Marvelous Marv Thornberry. He was at first base.
There's two kinds of bad. There's bad boring and bad funny or interesting. If bad boring, that's when nobody shows up.
That's right. Well, I mean, they were smart to get Casey Stengel to be the manager. He was such a, sort of a marvelous Barnum and Bailey kind of a guy because he knew damn well that the players were no good.
Well, you had Richie Ashburn who won the MVP that year for the team. And then he retired because he said he never wanted to play again after that.
But they wanted to bench him for somebody young. He said he wasn't prepared to sit on the bench for the Mets.
Yeah. He actually had a pretty darn good season.
Yeah.
He was a marvelous player. It's funny, he's never considered for the Hall of Fame, but he was close.
No, he's in the Hall of Fame.
Is Richie Ashburn?
Yeah, he was put in by the Veterans Committee in 1990.
Oh, I'm happy to hear that. That's wonderful.
1995, I think it was. Yeah, there was a big thing made in Philadelphia, and they finally put him in 1995.
Oh, good. Alan, didn't he win like 3 batting titles?
No, 1955 and 1958. His number 1 was retired by the Phillies.
And then he played with the Cubs, too, before he got to the Mets, I think.
With the Cubs. 1 or 2 years with the Cubs. But he was on the way down when they sent him there.
Sure. So here's the question of the week. Let me ask you this. Why is Gil Hodges not in the Hall of Fame?
No, I'm in a group on Facebook.
It's unanswerable.
I'm in a group on Facebook, and there are about 1,600 members.
Me too.
Gil Hodges for the Hall of Fame. Mark, I don't know if you're in that one also.
Yeah.
I'm in that group, too.
Yeah, but basically, because some of them think they put 4 of the Dodgers in there. They put in Robinson, Campanella, Reese, and Snyder. And I think one of the things that mitigated against Hodges was the fact that he passed away so early.
Could be. That's, he didn't do that on purpose.
No, I know. Well, the 2 in the 50s that I really would like to see in there are him and Minnie Minoso.
I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. How they can leave Minnie Minoso out is almost criminal.
I know.
No brainer.
Yeah, I know.
And
I don't even think you should have to make an argument for them to be in. I think someone should make an argument why they're not.
Yeah. Well, they have a bunch of years ago. I went through some friends, and we went through all Hall of Fame. This was in the 90s. And we were throwing out all these ones that were put in by Frisch and put in by Charlie Gehringer.
Yeah.
And the funniest thing was looking at Johnny Evers' numbers.
It doesn't matter. Look, after you write a poem, Tinkers to Evers the Chance, you got to put those 3 guys in the Hall of Fame.
Evers
I don't
like
care.
Billy Martin. He was a 260 hitter during the regular season, and during the World Series, he was a 400 hitter.
Well, Billy Martin should be in the Hall of Fame, too. Clearly, Billy Martin should be in the Hall of Fame.
Well, look what I have up in this committee that they got. They got Selig up, and Mark McCoy, who was turned down by the writers, Will Clark. I mean, they have a whole bunch of nominees who were just absolutely ridiculous. They'll probably put Selig.
When does the next Veterans Committee meet for the 1950s/60s?
I don't know. I think the result for the special group that they nominated, I think the results are in 2 weeks. But who knows when the Veterans Committee, the whole thing has changed.
Well, if Selig's on it, I bet you they put him in.
Oh, yeah.
You watch.
Oh, yeah.
Selig, to me, he actually did a very good job. I mean, as much as we dislike him personally, he actually did a very good job. My buddy wrote this fabulous book about the last 20 years of baseball.
Oh, The Game by John Passat?
The Game.
Yeah,
yes.
I read that, yeah.
Yes, The Game. Everybody listening to this show should go out and buy the book.
Yeah, I read that. It was very good.
The Game. Johnny did a magnificent job. And, of course, he got a lot of, pushback from the Selig people. Should have been a huge bestseller. It was a great book.
Yeah, I praised it on the Baseball Books group
yeah, good.
On Facebook, yeah.
But it's just fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And as I said, Selig did a lot of very, very good things, but they all had to do with the economics of the game. That's not the part of the game that the fans, specifically care about.
Well, the thing I think about with Selig is that if you look at the end result, he got testing into the game and for the most part made it tougher for these guys to do PEDs and influence the game that way. But it all happened under his watch, and he turned a blind eye to it.
I don't think Selig ever wanted them tested. I wouldn't have wanted them tested either. I mean, it's none of anybody's business, quite frankly. But I think
Marvin Miller was the one who said it'd be the dumbest thing in the world.
It was the dumbest thing in the world. What happened was after they had that government report, what was the fellow with the report?
Mitchell.
The Mitchell report. Once you had the Mitchell report, and all of that was supposed to stay secret, once all those names came to the fore, I think at that point they had no other alternative than to do what they did.
I think the biggest part of the problem was the antitrust. They were afraid they'd lose that because the government was involved.
I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. That's
why the Kansas City Royals came into existence. That's why the Seattle Mariners, because of the moves by the A's out of Kansas City and by the Pilots out of Seattle, the senators from those states threatened to remove baseball's antitrust exemption unless they got new teams.
Yeah. Well, that's right.
So
I mean, I'll give Bud credit for resurrecting baseball in Milwaukee. When the Braves left, which you think about it, this is a team that in 13 years they played in Milwaukee, never had a losing season, and yet they walk out of Milwaukee and go to Atlanta. And so he brought baseball back to Milwaukee and saved the Seattle franchise, which was going down the tubes quicker than water, being flushed. I mean, that's how bad it was. And that's actually a bad joke because the water didn't flush in their stadium.
Well, Milwaukee was shafted because they held the Braves to the last year of the lease in 1965. They drew about 450,000.
Yeah. Well, that's because they went to court because they couldn't believe they were going to lose their team, a team that the fans were supporting.
Yeah, and when the National League expanded into Montreal and San Diego in 1969, Milwaukee was ignored. And the Pilots had a rush out of Seattle. Milwaukee was the only place that had a viable Major League stadium that was open. The White Sox have played some games there in, I think, 1968 and 1969.
I think a lot of people said that the problem with Milwaukee was the fact that they were successful too soon after the team moved over. I mean, they had their first big winning season year one when they came over, and then they were a contender, and then eventually won 2 pennants and a world championship and had played in a 3-game playoff against the Dodgers in '59. But as the team it was a winning team, but it wasn't a contending team, they started losing fan interest, and that's when Atlanta became.
Well, it's ironic because the A's were in Kansas City for 13 years and
didn't win a game.
Season.
They didn't win a season.
Yeah, no, right.
Finley, lost right away, threatened to move them out. Yeah.
But in fairness, Alan, for most of those years they were in Kansas City, the A's, they operated as the AAA franchise on the major leagues for the Yankees. So,
oh, stop it!
Was it Mr. Johnson?
Yeah.
Come on. Everybody's
all right, guys.
Milk.
I want to ask one question. What precipitated Ralph Tycho back? I want to ask one question. And what a great show, all three of you.
That's not a
what
question,
precipitated
Ralph.
Seattle moving to Milwaukee?
Seattle was bankrupt.
And they didn't have a major league stadium.
Yeah, and they played in the minor league stadium. It held about 20,000.
It was 6 stadium, and they actually built some extra seats on it. The plumbing didn't work after the 7th inning. It was, as Alan said, it was a minor league stadium. And in the spring training of 1970, the players didn't even know where they were going, and then all of a sudden the moving vans go to Milwaukee instead of Seattle. It was like a midnight thing.
If they had waited for ball 4 to come out, it's very possible they would have been successful.
Yeah, well, Topps 1970.
Absolutely, that team has more nostalgia because of that book. Yeah. Hey, Mark, thanks for pinch hitting, saving my voice. You guys are terrific as usual, and thank you again for blessing us with the great show.
Always a pleasure, Ralph. Always a pleasure.
Hey, Mark, I want to thank you for your nice words about the thing I did with Ralph on the A's franchise.
Yes, it's one of the standard bearer franchises, but it doesn't get a lot of recognition.
No.
I know.
Very interesting franchise.
And we're going to try to give it a little bit more. Thanks again, guys. I'm going to sign out by saying to everybody to keep on keeping on, and we'll see you next week.
Very good. Have a terrific week,
Alan,
Thanks,
Mark.
Bye-bye.
Thank you collectively.
You're welcome.
Adios.
Thank you, guys. Feel better, Ralph.